Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Happy Hour podcast. I am Kyle Anthony, your host for today. We are talking UFC Perth, headlined by Carlos Prates and Jack Della Maddalena. We're going to be breaking down 4 plays here on the show today. Now, last weekend, we missed on our big play, which was Alexander Hernandez. A little bit upset about that. I thought he was a terrible performance from him. Wasn't letting his hands go. Wasn't offensive enough. And Rafa edged it out. But we've been running hot over the last couple events, so we got to keep it going. And this weekend, I do have a nice 4% play locked in for clients, as well as another play already in. Again, we'll be at that 4, 5, 6 plays by fight night. Now, I know we're already excited about next week because next week, UFC 328, a monster card, great card. I love that card from a betting perspective. I want to have a ton of bets for next week. And actually, I will be at that event, so I'm pumped up about it. Bringing my 13-year-old son. He's been begging to go to these events. His father does, bets this for a living. So, it's really kind of grown on him, this sport. And I'm excited to share that with him next week. So we will discuss a little bit more of that next weekend. But this weekend, we got a big card here. We've got bets. So let's dive into the main event of the evening between Carlos Prates and Jack Della Maddalena. Now, you've got Carlos sitting around minus 115 on the comeback here. You've got JDM at minus 104. Now, you look at JDM here, and we all know we're getting from, right? Some of the best boxing in the sport. I mean, this guy has high-level boxing. He digs to the body very well, smooth combinations, fast-developing combinations, and really mix up his target with his boxing. Good hand speed, and he is a durable guy. Now, you look at the other side here on Carlos Prates, an elite level striker, high level Muay Thai, good knees, good elbows, can damage you with any limb, good distance management, nice footwork, a lot of things that he can do in this particular spot. Now, one of the things that he does have that I think is a big advantage is going to be his power. Now, I'm not saying that JDM doesn't have power, but definitely the power advantage does go to Carlos Prates. He's got 23 wins, 18 by knockout, 7-1 in the UFC with 7 wins coming by knockout. Now, the biggest advantage here that I do see for Prates is the simple fact that he just has more weapons at his disposal, and that's something that I think is really massive in this fight here. And, I think he's the far more dangerous guy between these two guys. Now, JDM does have high-level boxing. He's going to come forward. He's going to, throw hard. He's, a good minute winner. He's going to mix it up. But he doesn't really throw kicks. He primarily is just a boxer. He's not looking for takedowns. And I think that's just not enough to beat a guy like Carlos Prates, who really offers up a lot more offense. He can inflict damage with, we've seen spinning back fists, elbows, jumping knees, all those things that he does do. And here he's got to prepare for a boxer. I just don't think that's enough here for JDM to really overcome the power, the versatile striking of Carlos Prates in this spot. Even the clinch, I do favor, again, Carlos Prates with his slick Muay Thai. Now, JDM, for the most part, has pretty much faced guys that are good wrestlers that don't really have striking, and it's been kind of over the last few fights we have seen it. Now, I'm not talking about Islam Makhachev, which he went out there and he pretty much dominated the wrestling, and it was a, lopsided win for Islam. But, besides him or him too, but it's, Bilal Muhammad, who doesn't really have good striking, but good cardio, good wrestling. Gilbert Burns is a high-level grappler, but no real good striking to talk about. Basel Hafez is another guy that was a split decision where, still he had an opportunity to win that fight. Even against Kevin Holland, this was another split decision win for JDM, even though Holland outstruck him 2 rounds of the 3 rounds. So, I think there is some problems there. I think for JDM, I think if those guys can land and make it competitive, I think that someone at an elite level kickboxing, format here for Prates, I think can really land some big shots. And plus, I'm hearing some people say, hey, maybe, JDM can do what Ian Gary did, work from the outside, pitter patter the shots, stay in your bike. The way that Ian Gary fights compared to the way that JDM fights, they are completely different fighters, completely different stylistics to them, where you've got Gary, who's very light on his feet, great footwork, better footwork than JDM. A kickboxer offers up more offense, utilizing his kicks, chop away at the legs, mix it up a little bit. Also look for takedowns as well. Can mix that up. He had 19 takedown attempts, only landed 4 of them. And he's tough to get in front of. And I don't think that is just not how JDM is not going to be hard to find. He's going to be in the space, and I don't think that really works out well for him in this spot. And even in the wrestling, I don't expect JDM to find wrestling here. Out of his 9 fights, he's 1 for 7 on takedowns, so I don't expect him to turn into, Khabib and look for takedowns relentlessly here. So I do like Carlos Prates here. I think the knockout is extremely live, but I think he's more dangerous, has more weapons, and is really going to pick apart JDM because JDM's just going to look to box. So give me Carlos Prates to win at -115. And the next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Tai Tuivasa. He is -205 in the comeback here. We've got Louie Sutherland. He is +160. Now, you look at this fight here, and I know that Tai Tuivasa, everyone wants to, he's a fan favorite. He's a brawler. He's an exciting fighter. He's fun. He's going to drink beers out of his shoe and all these great things that people do love about him. And I'm a fan of him. There is that. But he has been in a very bad run. He's on an 0-6 run. And not only just that, it's the fact that he is a -200 coming into this fight here. Now, he hasn't had a win since 2022. And although he's faced very tough competition, there's no doubt he has faced some higher level guys. The issue is he motivated? Does he really care? I don't expect him to be, although he's 33, I don't expect him. He's going to try to make a title run, or he's just looking for fun fights, looking to fight at home. And, people like him. And that's why the UFC is going to continually give him fight after fight. And also, this guy has a ton of MMA mileage for him. Yes, he's 33, but man, this guy has been knocked out, beaten up, over the last few years. This guy can't find a win. While you've got Sutherland here, who also does have his own flaws. He's definitely not the cleanest fighter to begin with here. He's also on an 0-2 run, but this is a spot where you got 2 fighters that are going to be brawling. Big heavyweights, tough to really trust either one of them, but they're big heavyweights. And you've got one guy with a +160 number next to his name. And, the UFC tried to book Tai Tuivasa and Sean Sharaf. And Sean Sharaf is terrible fighter, 4-2 as a pro, not a UFC caliber fighter. And still the UFC was trying to give him, they were trying to get, hey, take Sean Sharaf, knock him out. That's pretty much what they were looking to do. Sharaf falls off, off this card. Now we've got Sutherland coming in. I think Sutherland offers a lot more problems, a very more tough stylistic matchup for him, because the path to victory here for Sutherland is going to be aggressive and look for takedowns. And that's what he likes to do, especially early. He's going to come forward. He's going to look for those takedowns. He's going to drag him down. He's a big, strong guy. And we have seen the vulnerabilities on the Tai Tuivasa side where, he doesn't have good takedown defense, doesn't have that great wrestling, doesn't have a good get-up game. If he's flat on his back, I don't expect him to get up. And that's where also both these guys don't have the greatest cardio. But I think this is a spot where even if Sutherland starts to slow down, he can rely on the takedowns. He can, and I don't expect as this fight progresses, he could be laying on him. He could be keeping him on, keeping top control, banking time, slowing down Tuivasa even more. And the threat of takedowns, I think, also opens up shots for Sutherland on the feet. So there is opportunities there for him to land. And even if this does kind of play out on the feet, I think it's a 50-50 fight. I don't think there's one guy that has a massive advantage over the other. And it's a 50-50 fight. 2 heavyweights throwing bombs. Anyone can land a big shot. Anyone can find that finish. And that's where I do think there's opportunities. And Sutherland is a big guy, but he's pretty athletic. Decent kicks. Good forward pressure. It does have some power. Can get the wrestling going. I think that offers some tough things for Tai Tuivasa, who's on a massive skid. For him to really kind of overcome. And overall, Tai has been a can crusher pretty much his entire career. Yes, he's losing to, some tough opponents, but the guys that he was beating, back in 2020, he's beating guys like Henry Hunsucker, Gary, Greg Hardy, Augusto Sakai. These are guys that, did nothing in the UFC, are not UFC caliber guys. And Tai did what he should do to these guys and knock them out. And this fight really, really reminds me of Buchecha versus Spann last week. Last week, we bet Spann plus money and we cashed that ticket. But, the thing about it is that, the reason why is that, first we got 2 flawed fighters in Spann and Buchecha. Both these guys, terrible cardio, make mistakes, can get sloppy. There's certain things that both of them can do, but just a sloppy fight, you got to take the plus money there in that type of spot. This reminds me of that, where this is a 50-50 fight, but you've got Sutherland sitting at a +160 number here. So give me Louie Sutherland to get the job done at +160. And the next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Brando Pericic, he is minus 135. On the comeback here, we have Shamil Gaziev, he is plus 108. Now, normally when we're on this show, we dive into past fights and stylistic matchups and what does the data say and all these different ways we're looking at things. This fight is not one of them. It's because I am extremely, extremely low on Shamil Gaziev. This guy has got many problems. I'm not saying that Brando is some world beater here, but he has got some massive, massive problems. I think that the guy is slow. He's sloppy. He doesn't have much skill. Terrible cardio. Very hittable. Doesn't have the greatest striking. And, this is a guy that ran into the cage face first on a takedown attempt. That's never happened in the UFC, and this guy did it. I think it was like the first fight he had in the UFC. He, crashes into the fence. It was horrible showing for him, and even in wins, I think he looks very suspect. I don't like what I'm seeing from him here. And again, he's a hittable guy, and at heavyweight, if you have a negative striking differential like Shamil has, that's not a good sign. If you're going to hit more than you were landing in the heavyweight division, there are going to be big problems for you, and you're going to be sleeping a lot of the time. Now, Brando only does have 7 career pro fights, so there is that where the less experience, I think, is a little bit of a concern when you're looking at the Brando side. But his ceiling compared to Shamil is way different. I think that the upside of Pericic, I think he's got some ability there. He's a better striker. He's going to have the cleaner combinations, faster developing combinations, the harder hitter between these two. I think the footwork's better. He's lighter on his feet. And I think that's really where he can find a lot of success, because the one thing that we're going to know early in this fight is Brando is going to go for it. Pericic is going to come forward. He's going to throw big shots. He's going to wing them. And he's been able to find chins, and he's been able to put people asleep. And I think that's kind of how this goes, because Gaziev is a guy that can wilt. He can slow down. He can start questioning life as soon as things start to not go his way. He starts to breathe heavy. I don't like the way he absorbs shots. He hates getting hit. You can tell as soon as some clean shots start happening, he can start to really look for the exit very, very quickly. And I kind of expect that here. And even if this fight starts to, have some length to it, even if Shamil gets a takedown early or something like that, as this fight goes on, he's got horrible cardio, terrible cardio. And now we have not really seen if Pericic has this cardio that he can keep going, but I would expect him to have better cardio than Shamil, who doesn't have any cardio. So also you've got to add in is that the fighters that Shamil's losing to are strikers that are good strikers that are fast. Good strikers that can move around, fast combinations. And you look at Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik, the 2 losses that he has, Rozenstruik outlanded him 127-22, and then Rozenstruik knocked him out in the 4th round. You also have Waldo Cortez Acosta, another guy, fast developing combinations, some good footwork, knocked Shamil out in the 1st round. So that's kind of where I put Pericic. I think that he's got good combinations. I think he's a good kickboxer. He's got power, fast developing combinations. And that's where I think Shamil is going to cave. And, can Shamil look for takedowns? Can he get the wrestling going? I doubt it. I don't really think so. Again, I think there could be spots where, in that 1st round, maybe he can kind of bulldoze forward and drag him down. But he's not a finisher when you're talking about the ground game. I don't see him finding a submission or landing big shots, ground and pound, and getting the finish, because I think in the 2nd round, he's going to have no gas left, and Pericic is going to absolutely spark him out. And over the 6 UFC fights for Gaziev, he's landed only 3 takedowns. So I think this plays out on the feet, and I think that Pericic lands the kill shot here. I think the speed, the footwork, the better striker, the power is all too much here. So give me Brando Pericic to win at minus 135. And the last one here we're going to talk about is going to be Colby Thicknesse. He is minus 135 in the comeback here. We've got Vince Morales. He is plus 108. Now, you got Morales here, who was on his 2nd stint in the UFC. The first time years ago, he went 3-5. They cut him from the organization. He went to the regionals, won 5 straight, and now he earned his contract back with the UFC. But since he's been back, he's back to his losing ways on an 0-3 run. But the one thing that you kind of got to take away from it is he's fought some tough competition. Even though he is, losing, he's fighting competitively and he's taking these tougher fights. It's not like he came in and he's looking to fight a lower level guy. He's come in because he's willing to take these fights. I think that's why the UFC likes him. They're willing for him to come in and fight these guys that, that He's willing to take any type of fight here. Raul Rosas Jr. was a tough fight for him. I thought that was a pretty good showing from him. It was 2017 on significant strikes there. The 4 takedowns, the 9 minutes of control time is really what did it for Raul. But there were spots where, you saw Vince, he was very much threatening the submissions, 2 times, multiple times. He was just, latching something in, and the high level grappler that Rosas is, he was able to get out of those things, but still, there, to really be grappling and being competitive, Raul, I think is a good sign. Also, Elijah Smith, who is an explosive young fighter there, it was 40-40 on significant strikes, a close fight, and even against Taylor Lapalus too. He's fighting very tough fighters, very good, fighters overall, and that's where I do think that, being competitive with those guys is going to speak volumes here in this fight. I think he's got good grappling. I think he's got nice scrambling ability. I think that kind of fits in well with this, where he can threaten the submissions at any moment here. And you've got Colby, who is going to look for wrestling. He's going to look to get the wrestling going. And there's moments here where he can make mistakes. He's a bad decision maker in certain spots. And that's where I think that Vince, he's got a great front choke series. He's able to find the, a neck and at least threaten it. It's a very good defensive mechanism where even if he can't, latch in that submission, he can at least start to, have the opponent worry a little bit about that threat and maybe not shoot as much, maybe be a little bit more worried. I think that's really where Morales can find a submission if he's looking for those takedowns in that spot. But even this fight plays out on the feet, striking wise, I give the edge to Morales as well. I think he's the cleaner striker, better boxing, good forward pressure with some volume, can stay in his face a little bit here. I think Colby, kind of has a little bit more of the basic striking, nothing that's really, he's kind of light on his feet, but I don't really believe the striking's there. He's going to look for those takedowns, and I do think that that's where Vince can out-grapple him in this spot here. And I don't see Colby, parking on top for 3 rounds and just staying there and banking time. I don't see that happening here. I do think that Vince is going to threaten submissions, find opportunities to get this victory here. And I do think that submission is very live here, but you're going to give me some plus money here on Vince Morales and against Colby, who I'm not very high on. So give me Vince Morales to win at plus 108. So there you have it for my plays for UFC Perth. If you want to become a client, link down in the description. I've already got plays up, got a 4% play up. I'm going to have a ton of plays next week for UFC 328. I love that card from a betting perspective. So stay tuned for that next week. But let's get this cash this week. I'll see you next week, and let's cash.